Okay, so we shall get started. So welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Phibbs. I'm Director of Equity and Inclusion at the STM Association. Welcome to our D&I Task and Finish group production. So increasing impact, easy ways to make your presentations accessible and inclusive. And we have Jane and Christine here with us today. So I'd like to invite you to be an active participant in our session. So it's an opportunity for you to learn, to ask questions, but importantly, to take action afterwards. We are recording the session, so if you want to turn off your cameras, please do, but we'll turn off the recording for the Q&A session. So now over to Jane.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us so bright and early this morning. I know it's might be a bit bleary-eyed. So I'm Jane Smith. I'm the Inclusion and Wellbeing Partner at IOP Publishing, which is the Institute of Physics Publishing. And I am just going to kick off our webinar today by introducing the events code of conduct. So this is another tool that we've developed as part of this suite of work in creating all these inclusion and accessibility tools on behalf of STM as part of the Diversity and Inclusion Task and Finish group, which is quite a long name for our group. So this code of conduct just is a reminder to be respectful and courteous to others whilst you're participating in STM events. And if you'd like to see the full code of conduct, you can use that QR code that's on the right-hand side of your screen there. Once we have finished this webinar, we can share the slides with you after. So if you wanted to use this code of conduct within your own events, if you don't have one, then please feel free to do it. It's just a nice way to set the tone for a meeting when you're kicking one off like this. So if we could move to the next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. So today's agenda, we're going to take you through, first of all, what the D&I Task and Finish group is, how it kind of formed, and what our purpose is in helping STM to deliver its strategic ambitions. The STM survey and strategic priorities, so where STM's priorities around inclusion came from. And then we'll be moving on to inclusive design, thinking about how we can embed inclusion into all of the things that we kind of create and all of the spaces that we create for people to come together. Christine will then be taking you through some of the tools that we've created to support you with making your experiences and all of the things that you do more inclusive. And we'll have time for some questions and discussion at the end. So I think I will be handing back to Sarah.
So I quickly wanted to set our work in context. So we recognised when we set up the Social Responsibility Committee at STM that we needed to work on our own diversity and inclusion. And we recognised that we weren't representing the increasing diversity within our society, but also that we were lacking that innovation and ideas that would come from that diversity and flowing into the industry. So D&I Task and Finish Group's first task was to look at our own diversity. So we have about 400 people who work in STM committees across all the different areas that we plug into. And you won't be surprised to find that STM is led by women, so many women represented in our committees, but it lacks representation of Black, LGBTQ+, disabled and caregiving communities. So there's lots to unpack in the survey, and we'd encourage you to have a look at it to see more data and more ideas in there. So the Task and Finish group set out some core pillars for STM to consider to ensure that inclusion was a primary strategic priority. And they're here on the left: to drive accountability, foster belonging to an inclusive membership, attract scholarly publishing talent, and influence the sector and broader society. And we want to deliver on a certain set of outcomes, and we're obviously not a long way through these yet. But the first was for the board strategy to support DEIA. And in two ways, we've taken steps here. So the first is to set up an inclusion advisory board, which will continue the work of the D&I task and finish group when it closes, which will be shortly. And the second is my role, which is to be Director of Equity and Inclusion, which expanded as of January last year beyond Research for Life, which was my prior core focus. And the second area is around diverse event programs, committees, and bringing in new talent. So there's three things we've worked on. The first is the code of conduct, which Jane shared. The second is event chair and session organizer guidelines, and that gives us a set of priorities for our leaders who are setting up our events, and also a reporting structure for us to monitor within that inclusion advisory board. And today we're going to talk about our presenters inclusion guide. So probably we should get on with it. So I'll hand back over to Jane.
Thanks, Sarah. So just before we dive into the Presenters Inclusivity Guide, which is the tool that we've developed for you all to use, um, we just wanted to kind of set the scene a little bit, talking about inclusive design and some of the principles behind how we've come to these tools. So a question that you might have is, I want to prioritize inclusion in my work, but I don't know how to do that. And there's some really thankfully, lots of people have been doing lots of work on this for a long time, and there's some really good resources that you can find that are freely available. So you can see at the bottom there, I've linked the resource, the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit, which is a freely available resource. I'd highly recommend that you go and check this out after the session today. But we've taken some of the key principles from that toolkit to demonstrate how you can apply them and develop something like the tools that we're sharing with you today, or just apply them generally to the work that you're doing. So the principles start with recognizing exclusion. So we can start by acknowledging our own bias and recognize that we only have our own perspective, and that doesn't necessarily reflect the experiences and the perspectives of everybody else. So this can cause unintentional exclusion. So if we start with that place of kind of self-awareness, then thinking about learning from global diversity. So, you know, as a community of people that are engaged in continuous learning is what I would hope for our kind of scholarly community. We can probably acknowledge that if our perspective is singular, then we can learn from diverse perspectives, and that's the key really to true insight and helping us to improve things, you know, make things better continuously. And we've done that in designing the Presenters Inclusivity Guide by consulting with experts in the community that already know about accessible and inclusive design, and obviously doing a lot of desk-based research on the things that are already available. So we've learned from experts in our own community with lived experiences. And then the solve for one, extend to many. So some of you may have heard of the drop curb effect before, or the cut curb effect, it might be called. And this is essentially a concept of if you've got your pavement or your curb, if you lower the curb, that will help somebody who uses a wheelchair to get up onto the pavement and be able to use it. But it also has benefits for all different kinds of people. So if you've got a heavy suitcase and you're going off to the airport, you'll be able to get up on the pavement much easier. You won't have to lift it. If you've got a pram that you're pushing with a child inside, that will also make it much easier. Um, and that's essentially what we're going for in terms of the solve for one, extend to many. So implementing inclusive practices and tools for people with permanent disabilities that can create results that benefit everybody. And then finally, we just wanted to re-emphasize that this really is everyone's responsibility. So we can look to people that are inclusion and accessibility experts, but taking those small steps to make changes within our own working and daily environments is really the thing that we should be aiming towards, because every decision that we make can either increase or reduce those barriers to participation. And to help you reduce those barriers to participation, that's why we've designed these tools that we're sharing with you today. And hopefully that will help with contributing to inclusive presentations and also events. so you can see the benefits on the right hand side here. Um, Hopefully that makes sense. You should be, if you having inclusive and accessible presentations, that should mean better engagement with what you're trying to present from different audiences, improving knowledge dissemination, increasing collaboration. So if people understand what you're presenting and can access it, then that's going to create collaborations. And a big benefit for our particular sector, enhanced cultural inclusion. We're a global sector in publishing, so that's something that we really want to focus on and is key to what we're doing. If I could have the next slide, please, Sarah. And then I just wanted to take a little bit of time again to talk to you about something called the persona spectrum, which is from the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit. And essentially, this is just a simple tool to help us understand related mismatches and motivations across a spectrum of permanent, temporary, and situational scenarios. And it's a way to be able to foster empathy and also understand how we can scale solutions to a very broad audience. So it's not just about designing for one group, it's about designing across the scale. So you can see that the persona spectrum, there's lots of different examples here that Microsoft are given relating to touch, sight, sound, and speech. I wanted to give you some examples that might apply in the publishing context. So an example of the persona spectrum in a research or a publishing context. So for example, touch. A permanent disability might be a researcher with a limited limb mobility who's unable to use a mouse easily. A temporary disability might be an editor who's got a broken wrist and then they're struggling to type or to navigate platforms because of that broken wrist. And a situational disability could be an academic who's formatting references or presenting using one hand whilst holding a child. And we know that that's become more common since the pandemic, where the boundaries between work and home have become a little bit more blurred. And I think you'll often see academics now bringing their kids to whilst they're teaching, which is great. It's a great thing to do, but then also if they're only able to use one hand, might make things a little bit difficult for them. Another example in terms of sight, permanent disability might be a blind author needs a screen reader due to inaccessible PDFs. A temporary disability might be a student with temporary eye strain from extensive screen use. It's a bit early for me to get my words out. And a situational disability could be a researcher reviewing proofs outdoors and facing screen glare. So again, another benefit of working from home might be you get to go out onto your balcony or in your garden, but then it's actually makes it quite hard to look at the screen. So those are some examples of how the persona spectrum might affect us in the publishing and kind of research areas. And then we've also got some examples of how some inclusive design can be applied and some easy adaptations can be made in a conference context, which is what we're kind of talking about today, inclusive and accessible events. So in terms of sound, we know that closed captions were designed for deaf people, but obviously they can be beneficial for everyone who's in a noisy environment. So a really good example is if you're working in a noisy open plan office, you might not be able to hear very well. So just being able to read the closed captions is a really good adaptation that can be applied to anybody with that scenario. In terms of sight, we know that the use of we would encourage the use of color contrast and using patterns as well as color. So not just relying on color to support people who can't easily distinguish between colors. But then if you think about if you could distinguish between colors, but then you wanted to print something out that we were giving you today, if you can only print on grayscale, if we gave it to you in colors, then it would instantly become inaccessible. So just a very easy adaptation that we can make. And then if we talk about speech, if you're thinking about somebody who has maybe a very strong accent and they wanted to include the closed captions to make it as accessible as possible, that person might consider pre-recording their presentation so that they could edit the closed captions and make sure that they matched what they were saying. But this also equally applies to if you're planning to have some kind of dental work or maybe even something like your tonsils removed, you might want to pre-record the presentation because you wouldn't be able to present at the time that you needed to. Or even if you think about inviting a presenter to come to your conference and they've got a scheduling conflict, offering them the opportunity to pre-record gives them that opportunity to still give the presentation, but also means that they can, make both appointments that they've got in their calendar. So these are some inclusive design principles that potentially you can take away and just apply to your everyday work that you're doing, just considering those few principles that we had on the last slide, and then thinking about the persona spectrum here and how it applies within your working environment. That can really help to think about how one adaptation can, really apply across all different situations. So I think I'm now going to hand over to Christine to talk to you about the presenter inclusivity
Awesome.
guide.
Thank you so much for that, Jane. Um, Good morning, everyone. My name is Christine Smith. I'm an editor with Wiley in my day job, but by night, I'm one of the co-leads for Wiley's Business Inclusion Council, which focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm going to present to you all today the toolkit that Jane, myself, and Teo helped prepare along with the rest of the Task and Finish group members. When we were making this, we really wanted to have something practical that people could take away and use immediately. So it's a bit simple and user-friendly, and that's with intention so that you all can, yeah, utilize it. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. Thanks. So the guide or toolkit itself is to support speakers at STM events to create accessible and inclusive presentation. The format is a slide deck, so a PowerPoint document that you can utilize directly when making your presentations. It's accessible by design and in this case has the STM branding, but of course you can adapt it to your own organization. The contents reflect good practice, but like I mentioned, because we wanted it simple and usable, it's for sure not exhaustive in covering all of the ways you can make accessible presentations. But think of it rather as a starting point. And there is a further resources section at the end. Okay, you can go to the next. We won't be covering every single aspect that's in the toolkit today, so we encourage you afterwards to go through the document and see what other changes you can make. What is covered in the guide is an overview on giving accessible presentations, which I will go through that in a second. Text styling, which we won't have time for today. The choosing of fonts, the use of color, which Jane hinted at when she was talking about the inclusive design earlier. How to format your images, charts, and tables, keeping care of alternative text for images, for example, and more. How to utilize the accessibility checker that's built into PowerPoint itself, and how to utilize automatic live captioning in PowerPoint, which we are somewhat doing today, but it seems to have a little lag. So for giving accessible presentations, there's a few things you should keep in mind. One is that you speak clearly and reduce your speed for better understanding. This is helpful not just for those that are actually listening, but also for the automatic captions that it can clearly get, and it is working again, clearly get to the words that you are saying. Another is to use simple language, so avoiding jargon, acronyms, and idioms. This leads into both of those 2 points I just mentioned. It makes it easier for those listening to understand and also for the captions. I know Jane mentioned if you do have a quite technical presentation, it can be useful to pre-record it so you can adapt the captions directly, but for ones that are live, obviously, it's better to just say what the thing is instead of using a acronym, for example. Another is to use a microphone, which you can see I have on today. This ensures everyone can hear you clearly. The room you are presenting in might have a large echo, which makes it difficult for those with auditory processing challenges to understand. The use of subtitles, I think we already covered this a bit, but of course it allows those who are hard of hearing to understand what's being said. And I should note, if you're making a presentation in Teams, for example, there's an option directly in there to utilize live captioning as well as live translation. So that's useful if you're giving a presentation on a different platform. When you're giving one that doesn't have a automatic captioning built in, then it's best to utilize the one directly in PowerPoint like we're doing right now. It's important that you describe visuals to help people with low vision grasp information. This includes describing everything that you see on the slide and making sure that your slides have all the information that you're going to describe. So having both sides there. Cover all displayed text, so ensure the information is covered. I know we're all taught maybe don't read exactly everything on the slide, but just make sure that you actually say out loud what is there, even if it's not word for word. Do not over clutter your slides with content, as this can be a distraction. So you want clear and consistent slides there. And of course, record the presentation. So this allows individuals to walk back at their own pace and at their own time. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so here's covering the use of colors in slides. It's important that we don't rely on colors to give all the context needed in a slide, since there are people who can't distinguish between the two colors. And also, yeah, depending on if you're printing it out, like Jane mentioned earlier, on grayscale, it also isn't quite useful. The rule of thumb here is to use a color contrast of at least 3:1 for text and graphical elements. There, in case you don't know if the colors that you're utilizing follow this rule, there are a lot of free resources on the internet that you can put your colors in to see if it has a correct contrast level between them in order to be utilized. It's also really good if you can use dark text against a light plain background instead of the other way around, since it's easiest to read. And black text on a yellow light background is preferred also for people with learning disabilities and dyslexia. On the right side of the slide here, I have several color combinations that we suggest that you avoid just for having the best clarity. I won't go through them all, but some examples are having blue and green together, as it's hard to distinguish, or blue and purple. You can go to the next slide. Here from the toolkit, we have an example of how to format charts using distinguishers other than different colors. So you should ensure sufficient contrast to support people, again, with like low vision, as well as printing in grayscale or black and white, and don't rely on color alone. On the right side of the slide, we have an example chart here, and it has 4 different categories where each category has 3 bars on the bar graph. In order to distinguish the different bars, we've used different graphical patterns on each of the bars. So for instance, in series 1, the bar is filled with horizontal lines. In series 2 in the middle, it's a bold, full-filled bar. And on series 3, it's diagonal lines, so that visually we can see the difference between the different series without utilizing color. There are other examples of this with different types of charts. For a line graph, you might have each point have a different graphical representation, like a plus or an X or a filled in spot. So yeah, I think that doing this enables a better understanding. If you still want to utilize colors as a second overlay to these, of course, feel free, but just make sure that you have these distinguishers as the starting point instead of the finishing. Another thing I want to point out is that you should use clear and descriptive charts and axis titles. And then make sure that the text size is at least a 12-point text for charts. And I should note, you can see earlier with giving accessible presentations how I explain that chart and each of its components. Make sure that you do that when you have a chart that you are also speaking through. Instead of just like, seeing clearly is blah, blah, blah. Cool. And okay, I think I'm coming almost to the end here with what I'm going to cover today, but a reminder that we have other sections in the toolkit that explain a bit further how you can update your slides. The last here is utilizing the accessibility checker. Microsoft has a built-in accessibility checker in many applications, not just PowerPoint, but of course here, since we're talking about presentations, it's about PowerPoint. To check the accessibility, you go into your PowerPoint, navigate on the top to the review section in the ribbon, and then you simply click check accessibility. Accessibility checker will pop up on the right hand of your screen, and it will highlight any of the errors or tips in order to improve your presentation. One of the most common ones that pop up might be if an image or a graph is missing alternative text for images, or if you're missing any headers in tables that's not fully explained. And then it's really easy from there to just click on the error that has popped up, go to, for example, the image, and fill in directly the alternative text so that you're all covered if someone is downloading your presentation afterwards and going through it. For instance, we made this presentation utilizing part of the toolkit, but a few new slides. And some of our images, even we had forgotten to make sure that the alternative text was there. And we used the accessibility checker and fixed it. And it really is a quick way and a quick win to making your presentations more accessible. Before I hand over to Sarah, I just wanted to thank again Jane and Teo for working with me to make the toolkit. It was really enjoyable, and of course a big thanks, and Teo would agree with me also, to Jane on it, as she really did a lot of the work there. And also to the rest of the Task and Finish group that helped us refine the toolkit once we were completed. Okay, with that, I'll hand back to Sarah and look forward to everyone's questions.
Thank you, Christine. And yeah, really great thanks to Jane, Christine, and also to Teo, who's not got up very early in the morning. He's based in the US, but he's going to be running the session this afternoon. So with that, I wanted to thank the Task and Finish group members who've been working on this project over the course of the last at least a year and a bit. They've been a really wonderful group, and we've enjoyed their diverse opinions, and they've created, I think, some really great tools for us, and some great momentum for STM as it starts to take on board the D&I activities and the journey that we've begun on.